here behind me are the examination schools. Now, Oxford University has the highest suicide rate of any university in Britain, not least because of the pressure of exams. You're here for 3 or 4 years as an undergraduate. You are graded by how you perform in your final exams at the end of your final year. All those exams take place here. There is a heck of a lot of pressure, particularly if you want to go on and do a master's or a doctorate. You have to have one of the top grades to do that. These are called public exams. They are made very public. The results are printed inside the colleges. They're printed outside the exam schools. They're even printed in national newspapers. Your name, your college, your grade. Everybody knows. Who wants to know knows your grade. So there's a lot of pressure here, and there is a very high suicide rate. One unfortunate young chap just a few years ago walked out the exam schools on the high street where you enter and exit. Unfortunately, his college was University College, right behind the exam schools. I say unfortunately, he didn't give him much time to think. And also, unfortunately, his room was on the top floor of the college, overlooking the high street. Just threw himself out the window and died on the pavement below, in front of all these shoppers and commuters that particular afternoon. There was a few flowers there for days after. Oh, not these guys again! Bastards! There was a demonstration. They've been bastards. I hate them. They're policemen. I saw a plane the other night, and these guys just wrecked it. And they nearly wrecked my tour as well. Anyway, hopefully you can still hear me. It's a very annoying helicopter. So yeah, the student basically tossed himself out the window, having done a bad exam, and that's not unusual. Oxford has a very high suicide rate. There are some people, however, that take the exams perhaps not so seriously. There are all kinds of rules about dress for exams. Typically, you'd wear a white bow tie and a suit and a gown and a mortarboard to sit your exams. There is a rule, however, that says that if one of your ancestors fought during the 100 Years' War, you are allowed to wear a suit of armour. So, believe it or not, some students have shown up for their exams here at the exam schools wearing suits of armour, which causes a lot of merriment and I think relaxes people. But it really does, you can imagine walking around trying to do exams, but they do, they're allowed to. Now it brings me very nicely, okay, I'll give up in a minute, I think I'm on the right one. Anyway, I'll give up in a minute. Anyway, but it leads me very nicely to the ghost of the Eastgate Hotel here, which marks the eastern gate of the city. We've seen the southern wall, the north wall, this was the eastern wall here, and this was the first wall to fall to Cromwell when Cromwell successfully attacked Oxford in 1644. And the men who died here were undoubtedly wearing suits of armour because this hotel is haunted by men in suits of armour. And they're very obtrusive. They clank up and down inside the hotel, paying no attention to doors or walls on the level of the old wall, as if doing sentries and walking along, doing sentry inside what was the wall of the city. And there were men killed on the walls during the Civil War, particularly when Cromwell attacked. And this wall fell to Cromwell, and he surprised everybody actually by attacking from this direction. People expected him to attack from the north, but he actually attacked down Hamilton and over Charles here. And anyway, a few men died here. These are the men who haunt, we think, the hotel here at Eastgate. This is the most haunted hotel. Many eyewitness reports, much the staff and the guests have heard these men in suits of armour. Alright, well,
the Norman Church.
There's a beautiful there's a wonderful old graveyard behind this wall, next to the church. And one thing to spot in old graveyards are above ground tombs. I'm going to talk about superstitions now for a few minutes. The reason for the above ground tombs, and these are the oldest ones, is because the early Christians would never allow themselves to be buried in the ground because that was hell, wasn't it? You have heaven above and you had hell below. So the last place a Christian would allow themselves to be buried is in the ground, unless it was holy ground. Inside the church was okay, but you had to be fairly wealthy to afford to be buried inside the church. And by the way, that's where you get the expression stinking rich, because only the rich could have been buried in the church. So you're in a long, boring service, it's a hot day, occasionally we get hot days in England, and you can start to smell the rich people beneath you, all these dead rich people. So people go, oh, that's the stinking rich. So that's where you get that expression from. So if you were buried outside the church, well, you wouldn't be buried outside the church, you would be in an above ground tomb. So they're the oldest sort of resting places. By the way, what made people less afraid of the ground was when potatoes were introduced into the old world from the new world. Of course, originally people would touch potatoes because that was devil's food, that was grown in the ground, and they would normally feed these root vegetables to animals. But the people bringing the potatoes over really wanted people to eat them. So what they said was, they told people it was a good aphrodisiac. And of course, people were prepared to risk it for that. So they started eating potatoes, and it did them probably some good. And of course, it didn't kill them. And slowly but surely, root vegetable became acceptable food stuff, and the ground became less and less dangerous. And then people would allow themselves to be buried in the ground. So that's one thing to notice. If you go in a very old graveyard, you will see lots of above-ground tombs, as you see in this graveyard. If you see a simple headstone marking burial place, it won't be very old, because it's only in the last sort of 200-300 years that people have allowed themselves, Christians have allowed themselves to be buried in the ground, unless it's inside the church. Yeah? So that's just a bit of superstition I wanted to mention. Okay, let's carry on, which is haunted by a man who would have resided up here about 100 years ago. Now, that's the founder of the college there, William of Wykeham, in 1379. He founded this college. Not a very modest man, you have to say. He's put himself on the same level as the angel Gabriel, just beneath the Virgin Mary. So not a very modest bishop, you have to say, he founded this college. But I want to talk about the man who resided here. Now, the Oxford tradition, and it's still the tradition here at New College, is for the head of a college to live above the entrance to a college. So the current warden, as he's known, lives right up here. Thankfully, he's out for this evening. I'm not disturbing him too much. But anyway, well, he was there last night anyway. But yeah, so the man who lived up there 100 years ago as head of this college was one of Oxford's great eccentrics, a man who still haunts this part of New College and this part of New College Lane, a man called Dr. William Archibald Spooner. Now, one of the things that Spooner had a problem. One of the things he would do is get the first letter of one word mixed up with the first letter or syllable of another word. He didn't even know he was doing it, but often, well, it was sometimes quite hilarious, some of the things he would come out with. For example, he'd say to a student, "You've hissed all my mystery lectures, and you've tasted the whole worm." Yeah? Any idea what he meant? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? He missed all my history lectures, and you've wasted the whole term, is what he meant to say. But he was Spooner. He got his letters all mixed up. And in fact, that is now known as a Spoonerism. It's named after him. And as I said, I mean, these poor students coming to Oxford for the first time, this crazy man would come up to you and say, "In Oxford, you need a well-boiled icicle." Which is actually very useful in Oxford, a well-boiled icicle. And then in the dining hall, one evening, he would stand up and, well, a few evenings apparently, he would stand up and say, "A toast to the queer old dean." Of course, he meant the dear old queen. And there's another one that's slightly crude, so I hope the kids don't mind, I hope the parents don't mind. But it's a genuine Spoonerism, like everything else I've told you. One afternoon, a letter was mislaid in the college, and Spooner was very upset, and he went into the bursary, which is in the front quad here behind the door, and that's a sort of administrative centre of the college. There were a few secretaries in there. And he went into the bursary and said, well, I'll tell you what he meant to say. You can figure out what he actually said. He meant to say, "One of you has missed the post." But you figure out what it actually came up. And of course it was very embarrassing indeed, especially these poor young students thought, "Oh my goodness, what is he on?" But he was Spooner, you know, he was a wonderful eccentric. People forgave him for these strange ways. I mean, and I could talk about him all evening actually. After the First World War, Spooner, who was now beginning to get very senile, went up to one of his students and said to him, "Was it you or your brother who was killed during the war?"
No.
Wonderful man. And he's still here. He died here. This was a throwback to the past, this man. Until about the 1830s, all the fellows and all the heads of these colleges had to be single and celibate, live a priest-like existence within their college. That was how Spooner wanted to live. He was a bachelor. He was married to his college. He was a student at New College. He was a fellow of New College. He was the warden of New College. He died here at New College. He's still here at New College. Many people have still seen him. And this is a particularly white ghost. Spooner had no skin pigmentation. He was an albino. And he had pink eyes and obviously very white hair. So if you see anyone looking at that description, ghost-like, it's Spooner. And as I said, many people have seen him, particularly in this area where he lived and died, where he lived his final years, and he certainly died here in college. So anyway, another wonderful college to visit. This one is open, I think, between 11 and 5 tomorrow. Students live in these houses, but a very famous fellow of New College lived here in the early 18th century, and this was a time when all the fellows had to live in their colleges, and they had to be single men, as I said. And the man in question was the professor of astronomy and geometry here, a man called Edmund Halley. Now, this again goes back to superstitions. Before Edmund Halley were able to prove that comets were a natural phenomenon, nothing to be worried about, whenever comets appeared in the skies, people were very afraid.